God has not forgotten about you. What can make me whole again? My enemy came upon me to eat of my flesh. They fell.
Bridge the gap between the law enforcement community and the black community, because sometimes I believe that because of there is a misunderstanding and they can't conceptualize the two. I think that's why things happen the way that they do. The Bible says, "In all that get an understanding." So what we're trying to do is get some insight to things. I know the black community, but I don't know law enforcement. He knows law enforcement. He may have an idea about the black community somewhat. But we're going to try to bridge this gap tonight, and I'm so glad to have him here as a part of us. And Major Ahmad, who I was trying to get originally, but his schedule would not give him an allowance, and he recommended so highly Chief Brimlow. So I'm so glad to have you here to be a part of what we're doing on this evening. And I want to start off, if you don't mind, Chief, to just kind of give us a little history about yourself and, you know, how long you've been in law enforcement and, you know, things of that nature.
Like you, I'm a native Floridian, which is hard to find in South Florida.
Right.
But I grew up in the north end of Florida, outside Jacksonville. And then, for whatever reason, my parents decided that when I was end of middle school or end of elementary school, they wanted to start moving around the world. So we went and lived in Asia, and then we lived in Europe. And then I came back to the States for college, ended up settling back down in South Florida, started a law enforcement career back in 1995. So I'm right at my 25th year right now, and worked all different areas of the agency, everything from patrol, which I started off in Dania Beach, great city, and then went into investigations, did some detective work for several years, became a supervisor, a sergeant, supervised child protective investigations, also district property crimes investigations, things along that nature. Eventually worked in administration, the Office of the Majors and Office of the Colonels. Things with accreditation and staff inspections, so I saw the entire agency from that perspective, and ended up being the executive officer out in Weston for several years, and then over to Deerfield Beach, where I am now. I was the executive officer, the assistant there for a couple of years, and then when the current sheriff came on board in January of 2019, he promoted me to captain, and Deerfield Beach selected me to be their chief.
Wow, that's all right. So you are international then. You've been around the world. All I can say is that I've been around the city. So, so I haven't been that far, but we're thankful to God for this opportunity for this evening, because one thing that I believe is that differences can be settled. However, you need both parties to want the settlement, and I think that's what we're going to be dealing with on this evening. So my first question to you, Chief, is what do you think is the views of the law enforcement community of the black community? How do you think they view the black community?
I don't know that law enforcement as a whole segregates the community so much. You know, mostly, just as an example, in Deerfield Beach, we get 60,000 calls for service a year in that city. And deputies respond to the calls that they get dispatched to. That's pretty much what they get, how those are handled. 60,000 calls is a lot of busyness for a district that size, 16 square miles. And I think that for the deputies themselves, they're looking to come in and do what they can to make people's lives better. I used to sit on the interview board in human resources of new deputies being hired. Universally, when you asked them, why do you want to be a cop? Why do you want to be in law enforcement? They came to help people. That's why they became a law enforcement officer. Sometimes we forget that. We have to be reminded of that when we get frustrated with things. But that's the core of why we all came into law enforcement, is to serve and to make the community a little bit better. And I think that is the heart of every law enforcement officer that I've seen. You know, we get bad apples from time to time, which we're pretty good at ferreting out, and those that slip through, like any profession, whether it be you know, religious profession or anything else, you know, anytime we have someone who is not doing and meeting the standards, that becomes a big example. It becomes a big example because, rightly so, just like we have for our bishops and pastors, or priests and rabbis, et cetera, we have a higher standard that we hold those folks as well as law enforcement to, and rightly so. So when we have a counterexample to what is good, it gets a lot of publicity, it gets a lot of notoriety. That's a double-edged sword, because it keeps all of us on our toes much more. But at the same time, it often can lead to painting things with a very broad brush.
Absolutely.
And that's a danger on a lot of fronts. It's one of the dangers that we even have with new deputies. You know, one of the issues that I've seen throughout my career is that oftentimes we take new deputies and we might put them in certain areas to patrol because they don't have seniority, so they get in a higher crime area, wherever that might be. So, you know, if you happen to be assigned into Weston, your high crime area might be all Venezuelans, you know, and so if that's the repeated experience that you have, you're going to start to have a clouded view of what crime is about and what criminals are about, which is a danger, because then you become complacent as well. And it's the same if you put somebody in an area that is predominantly a black community. The only criminals you're dealing with basically are black folks, but the repeated exposure to that creates a mantra that's not the truth overall, but it's kind of a specific experience, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I'm a big proponent of changing that up and making sure that that deputies, especially new deputies, are exposed to many different communities, even if it's within the same city, so that they have different experiences, both because the crime is different in different areas of the community. A retail area or commercial area has a lot of different kinds of crime than, say, a residential area or a bedroom community type area. So it's important to keep diversifying the experience of deputies, especially new deputies, as well as you know, creating opportunities for them to learn more about different cultures. You know, when I first started in law enforcement, there was no sensitivity training, there was no bias training, there was none of that in the 90s. And now we have that, and the current sheriff also is promoting that and has already paid money to have some of that brought into us. And I think that, you know, a lot of that training does help. And but I also think that supervisors, middle management and upper management need to be sensitive to the exposure of deputies too. Like what are we allowing to be reinforced in their day-to-day experience? That's an important aspect of it too.
And you mentioned something that I think is very vital when we are talking about bridging the gap, because the way I see it, we literally have racism on both sides. It's not just one-sided. And what I mean by that is, from one perspective, it's as if it's taught, and then from another perspective, it's as if it's been forced on them, if you know what I mean. So, and let me see if I can explain. I'm very transparent, just so you know. Let me see if I can explain what I'm talking about. Because when you get an officer that is not abiding by the way he has been trained, then for the most part, that officer or officers create an image for the entire department.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
But at the same time, in a black community, when you get some criminal elements out there doing things, they create an image for the entire community. community. So for me, those images is what creates the racism from both sides, because you got some officers that don't keep the standard, and for the most part, you got the rest of them that do. But the problem is, from what I can see, is that you have an officer that do represent the department, but you got criminals in the black community that really don't represent the community, if you understand what I'm saying. And I'm gonna see if I can get to some insight to what I'm saying. When I'm talking about understanding or having insight, it's more kind of like before you condemn a man for drinking, find out what he's trying to drown, you know. And sometimes you have people that are doing certain things as if, and it appears as if they are bad people when they're really trying to survive, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that we got some preachers that shouldn't be nowhere near a pulpit. You know what I mean? The way they carry themselves, their lifestyle and all that, they just shouldn't be nowhere near a pulpit. But I also believe the same thing for law enforcement. You can straighten me out, you know, of course. For law enforcement, we got some officers that probably shouldn't be nowhere near a badge because of their attitude and the way that they carry themselves. But that's human nature. That's not a black community. That's not a preacher. That's just human nature.
Correct.
And here's where I am. When I ask you how do you see the black community, the reason I'm asking that is because I think there's some insightful things that are never experienced from the outside. Let me give you a story, and then you can kind of comment on this if you don't mind.
Sure.
A lady has two sons, one 12, one 10. She works two jobs, trying to make sure that she get her boys through school, get them ready for college, so forth and so on. By the time the oldest one is getting ready to graduate high school, she's feeling like she has been successful, you know, in getting him out. He's got his scholarship ready to go to one of the top colleges in the nation, Ivy League. His brother, who is 2 years behind him, is looking up to him like, I'm going to be like my brother. And then he gets off the bus from a function from his school, walking home. Policemen roll up on him, and they say he looks suspicious, and they end up shooting him. Now, the younger boy come home to find his mama distraught. Mama, what happened? The police just shot your brother. So now the younger one knows that his brother was not criminal. So that's a mindset now that don't like policemen. You understand what I'm saying? Because he's saying, I know my brother wasn't a criminal. Mom is crying. And then as preachers, when we have the funeral, now we got a family reunion that don't like policemen because they know that this was an innocent person. Why was he shot? Things like that. This is like the insightful part of what takes place in a black community. And I want you to kind of comment on that if you don't mind. What I wanted to do is to see if I can get you to see some insight into what takes place on a regular basis with us, if you understand, in the black community. And then what can we do to try to shift that or to change that? And then I'm gonna tell you something else after you get through talking.
Yeah, I think that there are so many experiences, and there's such a diversity and variety of experiences that it's almost insurmountable to try and articulate how to address those in a global sense. I think that where we lose our way is what I mentioned before, when we start looking at things, particularly things that are so impactful, like if someone's killed by police and it's an innocent person that's killed by police, and we start painting again with that broad brush, instead of coming to the table and really trying to understand the inherent dignity that each one of us has, and that dignity even is there in the worst criminal. They still have dignity that we have to respect and acknowledge. When our emotions get in it and we start really trying to shift blame and not seek understanding, and when we start to allow the pain that we have to shift to anger instead of that pain really shifting so that we can get to an empathy with each other and an understanding. That's where I see a lot of damage. And perhaps that can't happen because relationships haven't been fostered all along. You know, I can give you just a quick example, and I'll get back to the story, but just a quick example, you know, not very long ago, maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there was a shooting in Deerfield, and it was in the middle of the street. It was a horrific shooting. It was probably a drug dealer kind of thing, drug dealer against drug dealer. It doesn't matter about that. Somebody's son was killed in the street.
Right.
And so when we arrived there, which could have been a very volatile situation, there were many of the deputies that arrived there that knew members of the community. Relationships had been formed before that. And we were able to actually get chairs and have the community help us by providing care, even water and those kind of things, for the family that was going to be coming there because their son, their grandson, their brother has been killed in the street. Doesn't matter if he was a criminal or not. This is somebody's child who was killed.
Right.
And I think that once we deny that dignity, we can go down a whole array of roads that will lead to all kinds of evil, all kinds of bad stuff happening. But if we forge the relationships ahead of time, if we work on that proactively, then we can really address issues as they come up. And I think we also would avoid a lot of issues like what you just described, where there is an innocent person that's being killed by the police. And I think that that is where we're kind of lacking in a lot of ways, at least from law enforcement perspective. Now, maybe you have a different perspective from the community and from a pastor, but I see a lot of that where we don't foster that a lot, and some of that is just by the nature of what we do. I mean, I told you we have 60,000 calls for service in Deerfield a year. That's 60,000 times a year that force is being called into a situation. A situation, whatever the situation, whether it's a domestic, whether it's a homeless person sleeping on a bench, whether it's a theft at, you know, Publix or Target or whatever. But the community somehow is calling in force 60,000 times a year. And if we don't have relationships, you're bringing force in all these situations. There's going to be problems.
And that's where I'm thinking that the problem is, because you mentioned just a few moments ago that if you don't let the pain get in the way, that you can probably come to some kind of resolve. But I think the problem is that the pain is perpetual, if you understand what I'm saying. And let me see if I can put it in this perspective. And it's kind of like in the black community, we don't have hope of justice, if you know what I'm saying, because what we're used to is a black child, son, man, whatever, being shot or being killed. And if the officer is reprimanded, we don't see it. Therefore, we don't have hope that we're going to get justice for what happened. And in many instances, what we are used to now is he may be, you know, suspended or whatever, but we know eventually he's going to get off. That's the hope we have, because we don't see, for the most part, officers who, you know, in our eyes, just really done a criminal act. And if we felt as if they was there to serve and protect, then we can foster that relationship. But sometimes we have to experience confrontation before invitation, if you know what I mean. Because if they come in more invitational than confrontational, I think it would work out better, because we experience law enforcement working in the community but not with the community, you see, and that's where I think we're bridging the gap. I know for a fact that it can be done, but it takes some insight into both sides for us to get there. When the black community can see that we have hope of not being taken advantage of or profiled or stopped. I mean, when you think about somebody who will stop a man on his way to church, pull him over, get out of the car. He gets out. They see him in a suit, get down on the ground. You see? Now he's got to get down on the ground. They come over there and they search his car. And then they get back in the car. 2 police officers get back in the car and pull off laughing. You see what I'm saying? What are we supposed to think when these things are happening? You understand what I'm saying? And then if we report it, we don't hear anything. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that historically that has probably been a lot worse in many areas than what we can see today even. And I can't speak for the sheriff, but I could speak for myself if I were the sheriff and heard about that. That those 2 officers would be fired immediately, and they'd be looking at probably criminal charges for doing something along those lines.
That's what would help us.
Right.
You
Now,
see what
some
I'm
of the
saying?
things, and this is where it gets tricky, and we see this nationally, is, and it's not just with officers, but it's with any kind of violent encounter where there's somebody who committed a crime. So let's say whether it's in that case that I told you about, a drug dealer that shoots a drug dealer, or it's a cop that shoots an innocent person, but there's some crime being committed.
Right.
You have to be very, very, very careful that when an arrest is made, so a suspension or all that kind of stuff, that's all procedural stuff that has to happen, okay?
Right.
And part of that's governed by certain laws, and part of that's governed by other agreements. But when we get to the criminal charges, you have to be very careful, because when the case is filed by the state attorney's office, that case needs to be ready to run. And so the prosecutors need to make sure they have all their ducks in a row.
Right.
You get one shot. You know, I shouldn't use one shot when we're talking
But
about
I understand
somebody,
what
but
you're
you
saying.
get one attempt.
Right.
If you fail at that one attempt to convict either an officer or a drug dealer or whoever's committing the crime, if you fail in that one attempt, you don't get a second shot.
Right.
You're done. So it's imperative that prosecutors have everything ready to go if they're going to arrest and prosecute somebody of the highest crimes like that, of murder and those types of crimes. And sometimes it gets a little bit confusing too, because I even saw nationally just in recent times here where someone gets charged with a crime and everybody says, well, wait a minute, it should be a higher crime that they're charged with. And again, this is a failure on the part of the criminal justice system and law enforcement to educate the public on what happens.
Right,
But when they're charged with a lesser crime, oftentimes that may not be the final charge. But that's the charge we know we can handle right now. As we gather additional evidence to appropriately charge them.
With a greater charge.
With a greater charge. Just as an example, if somebody's shot by somebody else, that might be an aggravated battery. And that might be the initial charge, even though it's an attempted homicide. We can charge the attempted homicide later, but the aggravated battery is pretty easy to charge. So there's a difference in that, if that makes any sense.
It does.
So
It
sometimes
does.
you got to charge at a point so that you have the person. You maybe don't want the person running around, right? So you may want to charge the person and then move to the charge that you're finally going to have once you have all of the facts, once you have all of the evidence that you can use that one opportunity that you have to make that charge stick. Because again, if you don't, if something gets messed up along the way, that's done.
Right.
That opportunity's gone, and you have a person who committed a heinous crime walking free. So it a lot of times that is where that delay comes from in the very beginning of these types of cases. But this is a decades long problem that
Absolutely.
that law enforcement, particularly law enforcement, I can speak for law enforcement, I can't really speak for the state attorney, but we've done a pretty miserable job of educating the public on why we do what we do. And I see that a lot of times in individual conversations with some of my residents in Deerfield. I saw it in Weston, and some of that why we do what we do, or what's going on in the officer's head. And I'm not talking about revealing secrets here or anything like that. But what is it about pulling over a car if we can't see in the car? Why do we say roll the windows down? Any kind of thing that we do, and we're not trying to train the public in being police officers, but I think we do have a responsibility to educate the public on a lot of the things that go on.
Right.
There was a period of time here in my own agency. We had a deputy that was murdered and another deputy that was shot 5 times on a traffic stop. Why? Because one of the parties in the car was on his cell phone telling his buddies, "You got to come get me, I'm going to prison." And his buddies showed up and shot the 2 deputies, killing one and shooting the other one 5 times. That makes deputies nervous.
Yes.
If you're on the phone, because if they're doing a traffic stop and what's going on, what's going to be the problem here, so there are things that factor into what the law enforcement officer's thinking that we just have not adequately informed the public.
Absolutely.
Of why we're doing that and what it
Absolutely.
is, and it starts all the way down with the kids. It starts all the way at the earliest times.
It does, and these mindsets really do run rampant. I was just thinking about something that was out on social media where the father set up this basketball goal. I don't know if you saw this, and his son was out there shooting, had moved his truck, and when he looked and saw the police coming, he grabbed his basketball and hid behind the truck. Now, the reason he hid is because he's afraid. But to a police officer, it's going to look suspicious.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying? So when they stop to say, "Why are you hiding?" all of a sudden he's going to appear to be guilty, but when really he's afraid.
Because he's going to be nervous and exhibit these kinds of, and they're going to
That's
say,
what
what's
I'm
going
talking
on?
about. That's
Exactly.
what I'm talking about. So in a case like that, when a police officer stopped to say, he's looking suspicious, is it proper for them to say, "We're not here to hurt you, we're just trying to find out what's going on. We saw you duck behind the truck, you look suspicious, what's going on?" Yes, you see what I'm
Right.
saying? Relational as opposed to confrontational.
Right.
You know?
And the relation, though, in my opinion, should have started before that, because even at that moment, when you say those words, I'm thinking in my mind, if I were that kid, I'm thinking, well, I'm playing basketball in my front yard. What do you
Right.
mean it looks suspicious?
Right,
And I'm hiding behind my dad's truck. What do you
Right.
mean that's suspicious?
right.
So the relational part of that really needs to begin even before that, so that when the cop car turns down the street, keep playing ball. And that hasn't been fostered enough.
Absolutely, but think about the 10 to 12 years old who are fearful, of this because of the stories that are so vibrant in the community, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So I'm thinking that, and you are right, the invitational should have started long before that. But if it has not, then how do you handle it right then, is what
Right.
I'm saying. Is it proper for them to say, "Listen, we just saw you duck, we don't know what's going on, we're trying to figure out, we're not here to harm you"? Could that start some kind of relational situation, or are they permitted to do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, they are permitted. In fact, in an ideal situation, after that, they would walk over to the front door, knock on the door, and talk to mom or dad and say, "Hey, your kid got a little bit nervous. I just want you to know everything was cool. But, when we came around the corner, he ducked behind the car. We just wanted to make sure everything was okay." It'd be great
That's
if
what-
they made that contact.
That's what
In
I'm
an
talking about.
ideal situation, that would certainly be the case. And a lot of that is culture. A lot of that's mindset. In the old days, there was, I can't remember the name of the police show. Oh, boy, it slips my mind. But he was always, "Just the facts, ma'am."
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But that
Yeah.
was, just the facts, just the facts. Don't bother me with anything. I just need the
Right.
facts here. And, part of that is expediency, efficiency, all those kinds of things. And, but society has changed, and law enforcement needs to change as well.
Absolutely.
Even in our department now, we have regionally, from downtown, we have what's called Neighborhood Support Team, NST, and that's kind of a county-wide community involvement group that really is trying to engage the community in a lot of different levels. And I think that this is the trick, is to try and attack this, if you want to say, attack this from both ends at the same time. So that is kind of looking at how do we engage the community with law enforcement on on a countywide scale even, and they support the districts in what the districts do. And then the districts like Deerfield Beach, Weston, Oakland Park, Pompano Beach, we all have our own community involvement deputies and community involvement civilians. And with the task of building those relationships, every city is different. Every city has different needs. And it's important to focus on the specific needs of the community and then use specific tactics to work with the members of that community where we all are, where law enforcement is and where the community is, because even different communities in Broward County, even if even black communities have different experiences based on, how old that city is, what their experience is with either the sheriff's office or municipal departments. There's a whole bunch of stuff that factors into that. But we really need to localize that engagement and work from that point. We just before COVID, we got bumped out by COVID. In Deerfield Beach, we just started something called Walk the City, where myself and some of my staff and part of the city staff, we go out and we pick about 1.5 miles and we literally walk it. There are about 20 of us, and we walk it and we meet all the people that either don't call us, are afraid to call us, don't have time of day for us, don't feel like they should call us, or where we have problems.
Is it just police officers that do that?
No, it's police officers. It's also city officials. So, for example, last time we went out, one of the residents was like, "Hey, that sidewalk over there, there's a problem with side kids go by on their bicycle," and it got fixed within a week because it's that communication. And we do what we can emergency medicine-wise, but then I task my people with following up and saying, okay, that couldn't be handled right away. Someone was complaining maybe about some drug use down the street. Where are we on that now?
Right.
And you can follow up with that. But that type of engagement, and it's really a vulnerability. It's cops making themselves vulnerable, basically. That vulnerability and the community seeing that we really do care about what's going on in the community, that also helps bridge that gap, to use your words, bridge that gap between law enforcement and the community. And it's unfortunate, but I think a large part of that really is just issues of interpersonal communication and understanding. And people can sit down and fix those things.
Question and suggestion. Number one, the question is going to be, do you have a citizens review board for Deerfield? But here's a suggestion. When you do that walk, I think it'll be a wonderful thing if you ask some of the local pastors to walk with you.
They do.
Okay.
In fact, in
Okay.
Deerfield, we have a quarterly pastor's breakfast. The mayor and I talked about this about a year, right after I became the captain there. And he was great with it. He does a great job. And we have a pastor's breakfast every quarter. We had to put it on hold for the COVID time, but we're going to do a virtual one. And it's a time where we discuss real issues in the community. One of the first issues we talked about, as an example, was domestic violence. Domestic violence started to see an uprising, and we worked with, we had this breakfast, and it was like a brainstorming thing, and pastors are on board with things, and the pastors are bringing that out to the community and seeing that we are with them, and then we all together organized a day where we had people that could come in and talk about domestic violence to parishioners and to congregants for these pastors, and people were learning all kinds of stuff, and you see the results of that. You see the results.
Which is where the resolution is.
Right.
Once I learn how you all function, you all learn how we function. All of a sudden, you're no longer a threat. It's like, we understand now. No, that's just what they do. They're not after us. That's just what they do. And then you all will be saying, no, I know he ducked behind a truck, but he's probably afraid. Let me go over there and, see, that kind of stuff. That's what brings the solution. Now, a minute ago, you said that you all want to identify the needs of the community. How do you go about identifying the needs of community? What kind of process do you have to do that?
It's an excellent question, because historically we identify the needs of the community in a room with the doors locked all by ourselves and try and figure it out. And then we project what we think the needs of the community are. This is a different model. And this is a model where we actually seek the input of the community, where we actually engage the community in conversation
Mm-hmm.
so that we know from their perspective what the needs are. And we have to go into it, the reality that law enforcement can't fix all those problems.
No, no.
And a lot of those problems maybe are originating elsewhere. Maybe some of them are coming from family, maybe some are from social and economic issues or educational issues. But I think it's good that law enforcement understands those origins as well, and kind of can exclude some of that from our misunderstandings. But at the same time, by engaging the community locally, at the very grassroots, ground level, we hear what people in the community are saying.
Right,
We've
right.
had town hall meetings in my city, for example, in various churches that different pastors or bishops have organized, where I go, and I'll go with a couple of my staff, and we listen. And we listen to the gripes of the community. We listen to the positives of the community. We try to understand where the gripes are coming from. Some of that maybe we can fix, some of it maybe not. But it also, for me, as the commander of the district, lets me know, it gives me a little bit of a sense of the pulse of what my deputies are doing, because I can't follow them all around all the time.
Right.
And that's an important thing. We go to our district commission meetings when our commissioners go out and meet. It's important for us to be there. Why? Because they will complain to their commissioners about things, and I'm not afraid of complaints. So
Right.
they will complain to their commissioners about things that they won't call me or email me about, but I need to know about.
Right,
I need to know
right.
about. I'm responsible for the culture in my district. I need to make sure that people are living up to that culture. That's my responsibility. And,
Yeah,
and
that's
if they're
good.
not, then they need to be working somewhere else. But
Now,
that's-
I'm interested in all of the cities, and you can call me whenever I can, what you need me to help you do, because I have churches. See,
Right.
I'm a bishop. I oversee
Right.
many churches. So I got churches in Deerfield, I got some in Delray, I got some in Fort Lauderdale, some in Miami. So I'm interested in all of the cities.
Right.
And I would be more than happy to be a part of whatever it is that you're trying to do, because I can call one of the local pastors in that area and say, listen, Chief Brimlow called me, meet me down there, and here's what
Right.
we're going to do in the community. So I can be a liaison if necessary, if that's something that you need. Because I want to make sure that all the communities are safe, because we got churches in all of the communities, And I want to make sure that our churches are doing their part too, you see, because there's a missing link for me that our churches are not doing in the community, because the kind of outreach that is needed for, I'm sitting here talking with you now. Now I need to talk with
Right.
the parishioners to say, hey, y'all, listen, here's what I learned when I sat down and talked with Chief Brimlow. He told me this, he told me that, and I need to make sure that they understand some things. Now, and I promise you, I have no real gripes against law enforcement itself. I got family in law enforcement, members of my church or work for BSO. So for me, I'm for law enforcement. What I'm not for is the dark-spirited ones. That's allowed.
Which is the very first place that law enforcement and leaders like yourself in the community, that we find ourselves on common ground.
Right.
Because that's probably the very strongest common ground that we can find. Cops don't want them either.
Right.
Right. So, because you can have one cop somewhere in Des Moines do the wrong thing, do a criminal act or whatever he's going to do, and it's every cop in the nation that suddenly, gets labeled in some way or under some kind of scrutiny or something along those lines. And those kinds of things are tricky, because it's an impact on morale. It's an impact on morale, and I'm sure that you see that even in the pastorate when, somebody, a preacher somewhere or a pastor somewhere gets in trouble with something, and then all of a sudden it's,
The preachers are no good.
the preachers are right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why are we listening to them? Well, of course they're sinners. I don't know what you expected when you walked in the door, but okay. So, but the thing is that I really think that if we're not looking at these things from a grassroots level, we end up in a trick bag, because I sit in my office with my staff, and we determine what you need in your community. And the community sits over there isolated from law enforcement and makes their judgments about what law enforcement is doing or not doing, what they're listening to or not listening to, and we're both doing that. We're both doing that. So if we're not bridging that, making that bridge, and really communicating and really listening, you know, then we're both at fault. We're both at fault here for not making the community safer, not making our way of life better, not making, you know, what we hear on the TV right now, all the race relations better. We're the ones at fault for that. We're the ones to blame for that. And it's incumbent upon all people to really look at things from other people's perspective, recognizing that dignity, not agreeing necessarily.
Right.
I don't look for you to necessarily agree with me, but I do look for the conversation because, you know,
to be mature.
To be mature.
Yeah.
Because once we're mature and we find common ground, we'll be united as a community, even when we disagree on particulars.
Absolutely.
We can disagree on particulars. We can even disagree on certain solutions to problems. But at least we can have an understanding of those, or try to have an understanding of those.
Right.
I think sometimes, you know, I mentioned law enforcement does a terrible job educating the community, but I think that there are times where we don't educate the community on what our limitations are. We can only do certain things. We can only do so much. We are highly regulated by statutes and constitutional law and case law. There are a lot of regulations and parameters on what we can and cannot do.
And some of the officers know that regular citizens don't know what their limits are.
Correct.
So they'll push them. You know?
Correct.
I was watching one of the videos on social media where a law enforcement officer walked onto the guy. Him and his wife was outside their house. He walked onto their property to ask them what they were doing. They said, "We're here at our house. Can I see your ID?" And he said, "First of all, do you have, you know, a search warrant to come onto my property?" And the guy said, "No, I don't have." "Well, then you need to get off my property. You know, if I'm not doing anything wrong, you don't just walk up on my property and ask me for my ID. I don't have to show you my ID. What am I being charged with? What it is?" And they don't like that kind of, you know, stand your ground kind of thing, if you know what I'm saying, because there are some that want to be respected and revered and all of that. Some of them even want to be feared, you know. But when we educate ourselves to say, "No, you can't do that. I know that you shouldn't be doing this," that's the part that a lot of them don't like, you know, when we do that.
And here's a very important thing that you bring up is with social media, and this is a fear, a great fear of mine, because I had 4 teenagers. One of them now just turned 20, but they were 4 toddlers. Now they're 4 teenagers. But my fear is with social media and with other things like that is that we can look at something that might be not allowed by law enforcement, say in California, or in San Diego, or, you know, in say New York or some other place. But in Florida, that is absolutely allowed for law enforcement to do. And our errors are that we never have a conversation about that. So the public who's watching certain videos or something sees how something's done in Washington State and thinks that applies in Florida, when in reality it doesn't. We have a different set of laws. We have a different set of case law. We run into a lot of issues like that. You know, even simple things like, just as an example, this was at a high school seminar that I was at, and kids had mentioned they had watched a video, and they know that the police officer can't tell them to step out of the car.
He can.
But he can in Florida. Now, I don't know where that video was from, but maybe where that video is from, maybe the police can't.
Right.
So this creates problems too.
Right.
This creates problems, you know, and that complicates and muddies the water a lot. Again, we need to really open the doors of communication. We need to start hitting kids young. You know, we should be dealing with kids when they're in driver's ed. They should be dealing with the police at that point, knowing what to expect on a traffic stop, what may or may not happen, not just learning how to stop at the stop sign and what the signs mean on the side of the road. Why do we want our children? I don't want my kids to experience it.
Right.
Why do we want our kids to have the first experience with a traffic stop to happen at 1:30 in the morning when my kid is 2 hours late for curfew, when maybe he was out with friends who were smoking or drinking or doing something they weren't supposed to do, and now a cop pulls him over. Do you know how nervous he's going to be? And he's still not home.
Right. Right.
And this cop might call his family. He's going to be super nervous. Why do I want that encounter to happen at 1:30 at night I live in an area where there are very few streetlights on a dark road. Why do I want that to happen? No, that all should happen, and they should know what to expect. This is a negligence, if you will, on the part of all of society, not to work toward making sure that we're all safe, that our kids are safe. I mean, kids are going to believe whatever they see on the internet, and they need to know the facts.
Right. And then for me, the difference is that I see is the profiling is what, the difference is. I got a pastor that lives in St. Petersburg, and he said he pulled away from the light, and he was just taking his time to go home. He got pulled over, and the guy said, "Why are you driving so slow?" He's saying, "What do you mean? I'm on my way home." "Yeah, but you look suspicious. You was driving slow." I mean, what is that? You know what I'm saying? When that happens often, it gives you a complex. Like, so even when the police car pull up behind you now, you're at a red light, you wondering, is this going to happen again?
My heart goes up when a police car pulls up behind me, too, at a red light. So,
Well, not if you're in uniform, though. Not if you're in uniform. Yeah. So I think that what would probably be a good thing, if it's not already there, to have some very active liaisons. Having a liaison from the community to the police, having one from the police to the community, so that you do know specifically what the actual problems are. I know you say we sit in a room and we decide what the community need. If you got some community leaders,
correct,
in there to say, no, that's not what we really need.
Right. And what you say about taking to your congregation and what you learn from law enforcement and those sort of things, we're just as responsible when we learn things from the community to take that back to our deputies, to take that back to our sergeants and our middle management, that they also know. One of the things that I know from my citizens up in Deerfield Beach, and I'm sure it's not an unreasonable thing, it's probably prevalent everywhere, is a request for deputies to circle back.
Right.
Because a lot of activity just happened. The guy who just called the call in doesn't know much about what happened, but he's the initiator of the call, and circle back after everything's settled and everything's safe and say, hey, just want to let you know, thanks for calling. We took care of the problem. It wasn't as bad as we thought, or it was a lot worse, whatever. But just it doesn't have to be a long dissertation, just a contact back with the person. It's dignity, it's respect, it's courtesy.
And I think that when I speak of liaison, it's not just transferring of information. It's really building relationships as opposed to, just kind of being active in a community without having a relationship. That's why I say sometimes you can be in the community but not for the community.
Yes.
You're out there for another reason. So if we have like a productive liaison person, hey, Chief Brimlow, come on over here. I want you to meet such and such. This is my son, this is my nephew, this is my whatever. If you guys ever see him, just know this as a friend. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Right.
I think that we need in our society, as opposed to, I talk to you, but then none of my family know you, so they don't know you the way I do.
Right.
You see, as a liaison, I think that all this needs to be exposed, as opposed to I'm just talking to you, but nobody else is able to meet you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So in our communities, we are I think we are liking the hands-on, if I can say, from law enforcement that don't fear us. You know what I'm saying? We are lacking that kind of hands-on, because I know a lot of times, listen, we pray for law enforcement here.
Right.
So we don't,
We appreciate that.
Oh yeah, we're not against it, but we want to be understood as opposed to profiled. We want them to know all of us are not criminals. All of us are not. We do have some bad guys, and there's no doubt about that. We do have drug dealers. We got all of that kind of stuff. We do have that, but all of us is not that. If I look suspicious, then that's just a look. That don't mean I am. You know, you stop to check me out. What's your name? Let me see your license, registration, all that. And you check me out and I'm clean. Don't harass me past that. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
You know,
right.
let me go. I'm on my way home. Don't. Where are you coming from? What are you doing? Come on, man. I'm just coming from church. I'm on my way home. You know, don't start that stuff. One of my members here, believe it or not, went to Popeyes to get some chicken. You know, true story. Pulled out, got to the red light, was reaching in the bag to get some chicken. Officer next to her saw her come up with something. She come up and look over there at him, put the chicken down, right? So I don't want him to see me eating while I'm driving.
Right.
He might think that's, you know.
Right.
Pulled her over, made her get out, searched the car, emptied the trunk, the glove compartment, all that kind of stuff. And well, you look suspicious. I say, sir, I bought chicken. I'm on my way home. Yeah, but do you have drugs in this car? No, I don't have no drugs. You know, this is the kind of stuff that is far too normal among us, if you know what I'm saying. So it's almost as if we can't help but get a complex
Right.
when these things are happening. I drove into my gated community, right? There was a police officer right at the gate. There was another one down the way. He pulled me over. License, registration, yes, sir. Well, we're out here because there's been some break-ins. I say, oh, well, listen, officer, I'm glad you all are out here. The next thing he said to me was, you're not breaking in houses, are you? You know, how does that make me feel? You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
This is the kind of stuff, to me, that needs to be straightened out in the department so we don't feel like they have the freedom to do this stuff with no reciprocity attached to it. You can't just feel free to harass somebody and not be, you know, pulled in for it. You know, when the accountability is known in our society, then we say, oh, it's about time. Now we can feel free to go out there and drive and have a relationship, because sometimes we're afraid because we don't know where it's going.
Right.
You know, how do you respond to that?
That's similar to the experience I told you about the new deputy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you put a new deputy in an area that is high crime,
Mhm.
everybody's a criminal.
Right.
If that area happens to be all Venezuelan or all Hispanic or all black, that's what you're repeatedly exposed to.
Mhm.
And it sounds very similar to that if you have officers who are interacting in communities that have those kinds of attitudes, and that's the experience of the community over and over and over again, that's what we're training the community to think.
Right.
So
right,
inadvertently, law enforcement's training the community to think that way.
Mhm.
So, you know, solutions to that there are many different ways to address the problem, but one of the ways is certainly to keep a mix and keep the diversification of which law enforcement is patrolling which areas at which times, and that should always be a mix. I know that we have, you know, I do in my neighborhood, I know in the neighborhoods where I am in Deerfield, we like to know who the cop is that's around and all the time like that, and that's a good thing, and that does have a lot of benefit to it. And that's good for a seasoned officer.
Right.
They have a little bit more balance sometimes. But I think that early on, we've got to make sure that we train our officers
Right.
to see the variety. When I started in Deerfield Beach, or in Dania Beach, knew nothing, brand new, law enforcement, just come from college, didn't know what I was doing. I was on midnight shift near an area, it was called Modelo Park. I don't remember the name of it now. High drug area. It happened to have a lot of Section 8 housing at the time. I don't know if it still does. I know they did a lot of work over there. And it was predominantly a black community. That was my initial assignment. I was the junior person.
So they put the junior ones in the high crime area.
Generally, because if you're a seasoned person, oftentimes you want to, you want
wanna
to
rest.
a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
So this was how it was at the time, and so that's the area I worked. And about 6 months into my job, whatever happened, something weird happened on the shift bidding, because I didn't have the seniority to get to days, but somehow I got thrown onto days. And my days off were something like, I don't know, Tuesday, Thursday, or something crazy. But my first day to work was on a Sunday morning. And I was being invited to barbecues I was being asked if I'd come over and talk to some of the kids that were over skateboarding and shooting hoops. It was the same zone. It was the same location, still at Modelo Park, like a totally different community to me. And I realized at that moment, as a brand new deputy, that I had to be wary of allowing myself to be trained in the wrong way. And that these people were like my family. You know, they welcomed me in their house, cooked for me. I would, stop and have food. There were a couple of them they knew on Sunday afternoons. I had my favorites that I would go eat. And it was a different kind of experience. And I think that variety is really important. I think that's key. And it also allows for us to make that human connection, not a police, citizen connection, but it's a human connection that you make.
So this is my last question. I know our time is about out. My last question. When you say this is a high crime area over here, do the question ever come up why it's a high crime area?
Well, for law enforcement, that's a difficult question to answer. Oftentimes the answer has been asked of law enforcement, and so you have things that are called like CEPTED, which is like community policing, and they're trying to do environmental design. We're going to put a circular turnaround here. We're going to put some bollards here so that people can't drive through. And there's all that environmental stuff that they ask police about. But the reality of the causes of poverty, the causes of why do we have some areas where the education system seems to be so flawed and at such a disservice to some members of the community and not in others, and why do we have certain areas that the homelessness is off the chart or the mental illness? And those are not law enforcement questions. I mean, law enforcement gets sent to answer those, gets sent to address those.
Right.
But I'm probably not the best guy to deal with the homeless. I mean, he needs training or she needs training and they need help. Maybe they have other issues. Maybe they have substance abuse issues. We take substance abuse in the community and we attack it with criminal sanctions.
Right.
So there are all these complications that law enforcement gets, from my perspective, dragged into or pushed into that really maybe we're not the most appropriate person to answer that question. And a lot of those issues where you have areas of poverty or where people are on the margins, they seem to just like neglected these certain areas of various communities, and it's across almost every city. Why that's there, that's a philosophical question, but also a social question, and why are we as a society allowing that? But I don't think law enforcement is the solution. And when we try to solve it with law enforcement, my personal opinion is we're making a very big mistake.
Right.
When you want to solve drug addiction with cops, I think you're making a big mistake, or homelessness or mental illness, those sorts of things. That's not the proper professional, in my personal opinion, and that's a danger.
Because when you're more law enforcement than you are relationship, you just out there to do your job.
Correct.
You're not out there to, make friends.
Correct.
I see a crime, I'm supposed to address that. But sometimes in the community, the reason I stole the bread because my family hungry.
Exactly.
Exactly. I'm saying? It's not always the same thing. Yeah, but we certainly want to thank you for being here with us on this evening.
My pleasure. Really.
So I trust that I didn't ask too many hard questions.
It's conversation.
Yeah, that's
what conversation.
Well, we thank God for Chief Brimlow to be here with us, and we're so grateful to have had you all here. And some of you who you have our email address. If you want to email some questions to us, we would be more than happy to take them. And I will get some answers from law enforcement, come back, and we can put those answers out because, once again, questions need to be answered, and then I think the understanding can be achieved or it can be accomplished because when you don't know, you just don't know, and that's from both sides. That's from the community and that's from law enforcement. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Chief, for
Thank
being
you, Bishop, so much
with
for
us.
having me here.
We're going to ask you, as we get ready to close, that you can share once again with us on our different ways of giving: PayPal, Givelify, Cash App. You can share $25 with us, and we'll be more than happy to have that. This is just a start of us trying to bridge the gap in our community. I think for too long, the separation has been there. We have wonderful police officers on the force, some of them that wish that all of the crime and stuff can go away, and they just don't have a lot of the answers. And we got, I think, that pastors that can come alongside them and then just kind of do a lot of informing as to what's taking place in our community, so both sides can understand. We need the proper liaison from both sides to do this. So for me, this is just a start of what's taking place, and I want to be in a position so that I can help both sides. I want to be able to help law enforcement, I want to be able to help our community. No, I'm not a turncoat, but I am a peaceful seeker. I want to seek peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, Matthew 5, because they shall be called the children of God. This is what we want to do. But thank you all for joining us so much. I know we went a little bit over time, but I thank you all for listening to us, and we thank Chief once again for being with us. So until next time, next week, Wednesday, we'll be praying for you. You pray for us. God bless you.